Well, good morning. So in the program it says Alain Mayor, the CEO of Quilt, is presenting. That's not me. He had an extended stay in international travel, so I'm here. I'm Mark Fisher. I'm the head of marketing and business development at Quilt. So the previous presentation was actually quite good and quite relevant, a nice setup for what I'd like to talk about. And I'm going to spend most of my time on open caching and a new architecture for streaming, but I want to set this up in a proper way. I think framing is always important. We're in the midst of transformation, and any one of these things could take several hours to explain. But I think transformation is the right way to think about what we're now facing in terms of streaming and the internet and the architecture that needs to be put in place to support that. By the way, if you're a fan of Elon Musk, there's a brilliant article in Wait But Why on the colonization of Mars and his plan to literally back up humanity on the planet of Mars. But this transformation and these kinds of things, once in a lifetime kinds of transformation that affect perhaps most people in the world, is how I'd like to set this up, because what we're really now in the midst of, and I think most of you know this probably some better than me, is the transformation from a 50-year-old model of broadcast television to internet TV. And it's a curious one because in some ways, as an industry, in the room here, most of us are tasked with building capacity to deliver this experience. And in some ways, I've got many years of experience with telcos. Most of the time, the telco plans what to do and rolls it out, and sometimes it takes a while. This is an unstoppable force, this transformation, and it's kind of happening to the industry, in my opinion. And so the one theme that we hear perhaps more than any other is where is the capacity to make this happen? Where is the capacity where the capacity is lagging in certain respects the consumer experience we want to deliver? And if you think about VR as an example, the kind of bandwidth needed is just another example of where capacity is needed, and it's our job to kind of solve for that. If you don't believe me, you can believe Reed Hastings, because he said this, over time we'll see this trend take place. Most of the analysts would tell you we've already reached peak cable. That is, cable is slowly in a decline. And so what explains this? The ascendancy of internet television is probably three things that have finally come together. The march of technology, that's the ever cheaper rates at which processing units like my iPhone can process video, and laptops and the like. The bandwidth that's available inside networks, both mobile and in fixed lines. And then the network economics, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, which I think are also moving in our favor, but only if we think about this architecture in a new way. So the numbers are, you probably heard the phrase cord nevers, or now, cord cutters, now cord nevers, this notion that it won't be long and most people, at least certainly most young people, my kids, for example, will just simply not have a traditional pay TV subscription. They'll have broadband internet, to be sure. They'll need services from ISPs. They'll want bandwidth from the internet. But the cable model that we've known for so long is changing in an important way. And this has triggered what many have called the great unbundling. And you've probably seen this now with more and more big broadcast brands launching direct-to-consumer offerings like HBO, CBS, all the big networks, in addition to all the many web companies who already offer this service. The next bit of this, though, is important. To say we're simply trying to replicate the broadcast television experience on the internet is probably an injustice. It doesn't capture the richness of really what's possible. And you just heard about virtual reality. Again, this idea now that we can have a stream on demand allows us to think about it in different ways. There is now the notion of the football game in the stadium where there's 32 cameras, and you as the viewer at home can decide at any given moment which camera you want to trigger and watch. So maybe the one on your lead fantasy football team member It may be the defense, it may be the quarterback, it may be a particular wide receiver. It doesn't really matter. You'll have this kind of flexibility, so the power of your interaction becomes tremendous, and you can kind of let your imagination run wild and think of the various scenarios that are possible. So again, it's way more than simply replicating a broadcast TV experience in internet television. It's a richer, more immersive experience, to be sure. If you've spent any time with Amazon Instant Video, you'll notice that they have some very cool features like X-ray, which allows you to sort of double-click in the middle of a live video on a particular individual, learn about them as a character, get their profile, see what other movie they've been in, and so on. The richness of this kind of goes on and on. So I think Apple has got it generally right. The future of TV is apps, and again, framing's powerful. I think this is a good way to frame the kind of experience we're going to see going forward. And that now you may have seen Dan Rayburn's recent blog that Apple is taking 75% or more of its traffic on its own CDN. Clearly, they saw the need for this infrastructure, but that is not enough, and I'll just get to this in a moment. What we're really after is a comprehensive end-to-end network infrastructure that extends from the CDN all the way through to the ISP network. But it's clear that Apple is just another entrance with a skinny bundle, as they call them, with just the right programming that you want to watch at a price that's probably better than a classic pay TV subscription. And so this will continue to drive growth. So as I said, this demands a new network infrastructure, and to try to bring into focus what some people predict will be the bandwidth demands, you can look at what Hong Kong Telecom predicts here. These numbers are probably high in certain cases, but it gives you a sense for what they see as the bandwidth needs going forward as we move from SD to UHD to 4K to 360 and to some kind of immersive VR experience. And it's no wonder then that they've launched incredibly a 10 gigabit service to the home. Now, admittedly, Hong Kong Telecom is solving for a fairly contained bit of geography in Hong Kong, but this does seem to be the trend, gigabit service to the home. And the notion is that even in the local access, we need to ramp up capacity so we can enable these kinds of applications. So now if you imagined, if you're running a CDN here, you're imagining every US home with a gigabit service or better, you do the math back upstream, and suddenly I would hope you ask yourself the very same question I've asked earlier, which is, where is the capacity to deliver all this, all these applications? So let's talk about this now that I've got you engaged in terms of this need for capacity and need for new architecture to support these new streaming applications. The flow here is fairly straightforward. The idea is a simple edict that says, let's push content to the edge. And most CDNs, whether they're commercial or private, sort of subscribe to this anyways. You have a distributed content architecture. Your aim is ideally to get to the ISP's front door, or maybe to get deeper into the ISP network with your caches. Netflix does this with OpenConnect. Google does this with Google Cache, and the story goes on. It's probably not enough to get just inside that ISP network. Really, if we wanted to adopt this to its logical conclusion, we would be pushing content out all the way into the very edge of the network, the neighborhood, if you will, and even in the home. And thinking about how do we take popular content and move it as close to the consumer as possible. Because by doing this, we will be able to deliver content on a per bit basis in the cheapest possible way. We'll optimize the QoE, the quality of experience for the end user, and the whole end-to-end ecosystem really benefits from this approach. So I want to look at this now in a couple other respects. This notion that I've just described has caught on as an industry movement. There are now 45 member companies in the Streaming Video Alliance, which is meeting later this week here in New York on Thursday. And importantly, we will announce in that session that there's been a unanimous approval for the functional requirements that govern the Open Cache system, which I've now been describing to you, this final layer of infrastructure which will be deployed inside the ISP networks. At the edge of those networks, if that's a cable company, it's at the CMTS, DSLAM, the BRAS or DSLAM, where the first IP appears in the ISP network. And even in the mobile networks, we see a world in which caching happens at the E node B, for example, to optimize QoE. So there is industry alignment around this notion. You'll see here level 3 is a part of the Streaming Video Alliance, Limelight as well. More and more CDNs are participating because they see this as an extension of their infrastructure inside the ISP network. The ability to take popular content when there are spikes, and I heard Jack Waters this morning from level 3 say that there are spikes now for OS updates, there are spikes for the season finale of Game of Thrones. These spikes of popular traffic, whether it's on demand or live events, are exactly the kind of thing that call for this new architecture. Because if we deploy this distributed cache across the ISP network, what we've really created is this buffer that allows for popular content, not for the entire library. The entire library will still be owned by the CDN upstream, but for those moments where a huge spike in traffic occurs due to some popular either episodic series of video on demand or live events, say the Olympics, the NBA playoffs, this caching system, the open cache system in the ISP network, kicks in to solve that problem. So now let me talk for a second about economics. And by the way, the length of these bars is not indicative of the price, but if you look at the economics around how delivery takes place today, there are cost elements for a stream that's coming from, say, someone watching a Hulu episode or an episode of HBO Go or HBO Now. It's going to trigger a cost across this entire end-to-end stream. And what we're aiming to do here, and what I've been articulating, is this idea of a push, an edict that says let's push content to the edge, that popular content, in such a way that we have a beneficial impact on every cost element in the end-to-end value chain. And this is not necessarily to scale, but it gives you the sense that now we have the opportunity to invoke a cache system that will drive the cost down in a dramatic way and at the same time optimize for QoE. And again, I want to emphasize this is a cache system that is leveraged to the CDNs who are delivering traffic today anyways. And it's designed to optimize, not to carry the entire content library, but to really examine on any given day what's popular and therefore what do I need to deliver to bring content to the edge. And that may change one day to the next, because on one day everyone's upgrading their iPhones, the next day it's the Game of Thrones season finale, and the next day the NBA championships are on. So this cache, part of the ISP infrastructure, a shared and universal and neutral cache system, is what can actually drive to this outcome, which I would hope most everyone in the room generally would nod to. If we can drive costs down, we're doing a good thing. Two more points. First, the ROI on this is pretty clean. It's pretty straightforward. This is a really tightly bound ROI analysis. This is just one example in a US operator network where we're achieving nearly a $1 billion savings over 5 years' time. So if you examine it solely from the standpoint of does it cost less to purchase cache delivery in the neighborhood than it would to build through brute force the traditional network, routers, links, switches, and the like, yes, it does. It's a substantially more efficient method by which to create capacity within the ISP network than traditional means. And then the other part of this is quality of experience. This is one example. Obviously, this is Netflix's own measurements, but we've shared publicly that we've deployed at Mediacom, and you can kind of quickly and visually see a beneficial impact to Mediacom and their network from the time that they began this open cache deployment until recently, when QoE improved dramatically. There were and you can see, I think you probably can't make out the numbers exactly, but in essence, Early 2014, they were delivering largely SD quality streams, and now, fast forward to the end of last year, that's moved to HD quality. One other example, we work with Yahoo, who I know is a part of the event this week, and they had a fascinating experiment for those of you who participated. Last fall, they were, other than the local cities for the home teams that were playing in the game, they were the only source of the live broadcast of an NFL game worldwide. This game was actually early on a Sunday morning here, but it was being played in London. But where we were deployed, where open caching systems were deployed by Quilt, we had the opportunity to cache and deliver that live stream, because the same cache that can be used for on-demand delivery or software update delivery can be also used for live stream delivery. And we had, again, no surprise, where we were delivering those streams compared to the average bit rate of the upstream source, which in the Yahoo case, I believe they had 5 or 6 CDNs that they were using to deliver those streams. We were achieving, on average, about a 30% improvement in QoE, as measured by average bit rate. So, the revolution will not be televised. If you remember this protest song from quite some time ago, many of you may be too young to remember that, but anyway, this is somewhat true. As I said at the beginning, we're in the midst of a transformation, and I think the right way to think about this is a transformation that is unstoppable, calls for a new architecture that can efficiently and cost-effectively bring the capacity, put the capacity in place to deliver the experience that people are after. That capacity, that demand knows no bounds. And so our task, in part, is to think about how we create an architecture that gets that done. As you saw, we're collaborating within the Streaming Video Alliance with 45 companies to do just that. We have functional requirements approved. We're moving forward with the specification, which will probably be finished near the end of the year. And we think this is part of, this doesn't explain the entire new architecture, but it's an important element of the new architecture that will ultimately deliver internet TV. Okay, I'll take a couple questions if there are any. Thank you for your time. Yes?
Could you contrast how your caching, overlay, and architecture differs from legacy peer-to-peer?
Yeah, so the question was contrast this architecture that I've been describing with the legacy peer-to-peer. Yeah, so peer-to-peer is sort of not on the radar for what we're doing within this organization. It has had lots of applications in different areas. I don't know the full history of it. It's still popular overseas, but of course there have been many concerns about respect for intellectual property and software rights and so on. So this is not a peer-to-peer architecture in terms of the functional requirements that I described that have been approved by the Streaming Video Alliance. And really it's, you can think of it as a subset of the CDN functionality that's sitting in a cache node inside the ISP network. I hope that answers your question. Yes?
You can tell I'm sitting with too many lawyers, it's maybe an old issue.
Right.
Does this technically violate the Millennium Copyright Act? By having
No.
public performance cached in an environment with or without, you can say with the permission of the content provider would be fine, or without the permission. Is that an issue? I know it's an old...
Yeah. So the question, it's a good question, and you're absolutely right. It's a question worth asking. So the question was, does this practice violate any of the recent copyright acts? And I'll answer this in two parts. First of all, as you look at the function requirements that have been approved and you look at the members of the Streaming Video Alliance, that is the end-to-end ecosystem. So those function requirements assume, if you will, or expect that the upstream, either the commercial CDN or the private CDN or the content owner or rights holder is a participant in the delivery. That's one part. The second part is that as it relates to network optimization, there's a provision in this act that says network operators have permission to manage, it's like a network management service, so they have the right to optimize their traffic, which this is doing as well, so long as they're not caching the content for an extended duration. So there's actually two methods by which this whole approach fits nicely into current law, current regulation. Yeah. Yes.
Follow-up to this question.
Yep.
In this case, will the operator or ISP need to have an agreement with the content provider for you to be able to cache that particular content?
Yeah, so the question was, in this case, will the ISP, the operator, need an agreement with the upstream source, let's say? It could be a CDN, it could be a content provider or the content owner in order to cache this. And again, I'll say as a broad umbrella, you saw the members of the Streaming Video Alliance, plenty of content owners, content distributors that are a part of this. So yes, by using this, implementing this, deploying this open caching layer, then the content provider is a knowing participant in that caching function in the ISP network. And just to be clear, it doesn't require, it wouldn't necessarily require a commercial agreement between the two parties, but it would suggest that there's collaboration in place for them when they're delivering when the ISP is delivering that content provider's traffic. Any other questions? Looking for, yep.
Still related again to the same theme, but
Yep.
with increasing encryption of content,
Yep.
is that going to be addressable? Are they talking about that in the Streaming Video Alliance as part of what they're enabling?
Yeah, so this question is given the trend towards encrypted traffic, how does that work inside this environment? And once again, now you can understand that if this is and the function requirements that were unanimously approved actually specifically provide for the delivery of encrypted traffic. And so now you can appreciate that if the open cache in the ISP network is a member, a trusted member of the value chain, then the idea that maybe this particular stream is going to be encrypted with SSL, that just turns out to be a use case because now you can see this open cache node in the ISP network has a subset of CDN functionality, so it can perform the delivery of an encrypted stream to the end user if that's what is called for in that particular case. It's a very good question. Okay, I think I've used the time. Unless there's anything more, we'll wrap up. And I actually don't know who's next on the agenda. Maybe it's time for a break. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.